The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval base in San as Petty Officer, Second Class Maria Santos adjusted her medical pack for the third time. Her hands moved with practiced precision, checking each piece of equipment despite having done the same routine countless times before. Today felt different, though. Today, she would finally deploy with SEAL Team 7 after months of specialized training and evaluation. Maria had earned her place through sheer determination and skill, but she knew the men she would serve alongside still had their doubts. At 24, she was one of the youngest corpsmen ever assigned to a SEAL team, and certainly one of the few women to break through the traditionally male-dominated Special Operations Medical Corps. Her slight frame and soft-spoken demeanor often led people to underestimate her capabilities, something that had followed her throughout her military career. The briefing room buzzed with quiet conversation as the 8-man team gathered around a large table covered with maps and intelligence photos. Lieutenant Commander Jake, the team leader, stood at the head of the table with his weathered face showing the marks of countless missions in hostile territories. His eyes briefly met Maria's as she entered, offering a professional nod that revealed neither approval nor disapproval. Chief Petty Officer Tommy, the team's senior enlisted member, had been vocal about his concerns regarding having a female corpsman join their tight-knit unit. His objections weren't based on prejudice, he claimed, but on practical concerns about unit cohesion and the physical demands of their missions. The other team members had mostly remained neutral, adopting a wait-and-see attitude that left Maria feeling like she was constantly being evaluated. The mission briefing revealed their destination. A remote region of Afghanistan where intelligence suggested a high-value target was coordinating attacks against coalition forces. The terrain would be challenging, with steep mountain passes and limited extraction options. The team would insert via helicopter under cover of darkness, conduct surveillance for several days, and either capture or eliminate the target based on what they observed. As Lieutenant Commander outlined the operational details, Maria studied each team member's reaction. Petty Officer First Class Danny, the team's communications specialist, seemed absorbed in the technical aspects of maintaining contact with headquarters across the mountainous terrain. Hospital Corpsman First Class Alex Wright, who had initially been skeptical about Maria joining the team, now appeared focused solely on the mission parameters. The most concerning aspect of the briefing came when discussed the medical considerations. The remote location meant that standard medevac procedures would be impossible for at least the first 48 hours of the operation. Any serious injuries would need to be stabilized and treated in the field until an extraction could be arranged. The weight of this responsibility settled on Maria's shoulders, as she realized that 8 highly trained warriors would depend entirely on her medical expertise if something went wrong. After the briefing, the team dispersed to conduct final equipment checks and personal preparations. Maria found herself alone in the medical preparation area, methodically going through her supplies one more time. Her medical kit contained everything from basic wound dressings to emergency surgical instruments, along with a carefully calculated selection of medications that could mean the difference between life and death in a crisis situation. Chief approached her workstation with a serious expression. His massive frame seemed to fill the entire doorway as he watched her organize her medical supplies with meticulous attention to detail. For several moments, neither of them spoke, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. Santos finally said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had served in special operations for over 15 years. I want you to understand something about what we do out there. These men have been through hell together and they trust each other with their lives. That kind of trust doesn't come easy, and it sure doesn't come quick. Maria looked up from her equipment, meeting his steady gaze without flinching. She had heard variations of this speech before during her training, but something in his tone suggested this conversation was different. His words carried the weight of genuine concern rather than simple intimidation. I understand that, Chief, Maria replied, her voice steady despite the nervousness she felt inside. I know I have to prove myself, and I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to earn that trust. These men's lives are my responsibility, and I don't take that lightly. Studied her for another moment before nodding slowly. Your training scores were impressive, and your instructors spoke highly of your abilities, but training and real-world operations are two different things entirely. Out there, when someone's bleeding out and calling for a corpsman, all that matters is whether you can perform under pressure. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Petty Officer, who needed to coordinate the medical communication procedures with Maria. As walked away, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that she was being tested before the mission even began. Every interaction seemed designed to gauge her readiness and commitment to the team. The final hours before deployment passed quickly as the team conducted last-minute briefings and equipment checks. Maria found herself reviewing medical procedures in her mind, running through various scenarios that might require her intervention. The weight of her medical pack felt heavier than usual as she considered all the ways the mission could go wrong. As darkness fell over the base, the team gathered at the helicopter landing pad for final preparations. The aircraft that would carry them to Afghanistan sat nearby, its rotors slowly spinning as the crew completed their pre-flight checks. The sound of the engines created a constant background hum that seemed to emphasize the seriousness of what lay ahead. Lieutenant Commander gathered the team for one final briefing, his voice barely audible over the sound of the helicopter. The mission timeline was tight, with insertions scheduled for just after midnight local time. Weather conditions were marginal but acceptable, with scattered clouds that would provide additional concealment during their approach. Maria checked her medical equipment one last time as the team prepared to board the aircraft. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar routine, but her mind was focused on the challenges that lay ahead. She knew that this mission would likely determine her future with the team, and possibly her entire career in special operations medicine. The helicopter lifted off exactly on schedule, carrying 8 warriors into the darkness toward an uncertain fate in the mountains of Afghanistan. As the base disappeared below them, Maria felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. She had trained for this moment for months, but nothing could truly prepare someone for the reality of combat operations with a SEAL team. The flight to their insertion point would take several hours, giving the team time to rest and mentally prepare for what lay ahead. Maria used the time to review her medical protocols once more, knowing that when the moment came to prove herself, there would be no second chances. The darkness outside the helicopter windows seemed to mirror the uncertainty of what awaited them in the mountains, but she was determined to show her teammates that their faith in her abilities would not be misplaced. The helicopter touched down on a rocky plateau just as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern horizon. The team moved quickly and silently, their boots barely making a sound on the loose gravel as they established a defensive perimeter around the landing zone. Within minutes, the aircraft had disappeared into the morning mist, leaving 8 warriors alone in some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. Maria felt the thin mountain air burning in her lungs as the team began their trek toward the observation point. The altitude was significantly higher than anything she had experienced during training, and she found herself working harder than expected to keep pace with the others. None of the team members commented on her slightly labored breathing, but she was acutely aware that they were all watching to see how she handled the physical demands of the mission. The target compound lay in a valley approximately 6 miles from their insertion point, accessible only through a narrow mountain pass that offered excellent concealment, but also presented significant tactical challenges. Lieutenant Commander led the patrol with the confidence of someone who had navigated similar terrain countless times before, while Chief brought up the rear to ensure no one fell behind. By mid-morning, the team had established their observation post on a ridge overlooking the target valley. The position offered excellent visibility of the compound while remaining concealed from anyone below. Maria helped establish the small camp, noting how each team member moved with practiced efficiency despite the challenging environment. The first day of surveillance passed without incident as the team rotated between observation duties and rest periods. Maria used her downtime to acclimate to the altitude while monitoring the health status of her teammates. Several of them showed mild signs of altitude sickness, but nothing that required medical intervention beyond ensuring proper hydration and rest. During the second night, their mission parameters suddenly changed when Petty Officer received an urgent communication from headquarters. Intelligence sources had identified a second high-value target who would be arriving at the compound within the next 12 hours. The team's orders were modified to capture both targets if possible, or eliminate them if capture proved impossible. The change in mission requirements meant the team would need to reposition closer to the compound, moving from their secure observation post to a location that offered better tactical options, but significantly more risk. As they prepared for the movement, Maria double-checked her medical supplies and considered how the new position might affect her ability to treat casualties if the operation went wrong. The approach to the new position required crossing an exposed ridgeline where the team would be vulnerable to observation from the valley below. Lieutenant Commander made the decision to move during the pre-dawn hours when visibility would be limited, but still sufficient for the team to navigate safely through the rocky terrain. Halfway across the exposed ridge, disaster struck without warning. Petty officer, who was serving as the point man for the movement, stepped on a piece of loose shale that gave way beneath his weight. The resulting rockslide sent him tumbling down a steep slope, his equipment clattering against the rocks as he fell nearly 30 feet before coming to rest against a large boulder. The sound of the rockslide echoed across the valley like a gunshot, immediately compromising the team's position and alerting anyone below to their presence. Chief quickly organized the remaining team members into defensive positions, while Lieutenant Commander assessed their tactical situation. Meanwhile, Maria grabbed her medical kit and began making her way down the treacherous slope towards position. The descent was more dangerous than anything she had encountered during training, with loose rocks shifting beneath her feet and threatening to send her tumbling down the same path had taken. She could see him lying motionless beside the boulder, his left leg bent at an unnatural angle that suggested a serious fracture. Time was critical not only because of his injuries, but because the noise of the rockslide had likely alerted hostile forces to their presence. When Maria reached position, she immediately began her medical assessment while the rest of the team provided security from above. His left leg showed obvious signs of a compound fracture, with bone protruding through the skin and significant bleeding that needed immediate attention. More concerning was his decreased level of consciousness, suggesting a possible head injury from his impact with the rocks during the fall. Working quickly but methodically, Maria began treating his injuries while constantly aware that enemy forces might be moving toward their location. She established an intravenous line to address potential shock from blood loss, applied direct pressure to control the bleeding from his leg wound, and immobilized the fracture using materials from her medical kit. Her training took over as she moved through the established protocols for treating trauma patients in a combat environment. The head injury proved more challenging to assess given the limited diagnostic equipment available in the field. Remained unconscious, but showed positive responses to painful stimuli, suggesting that while the injury was serious, it might not be immediately life-threatening. Maria made the decision to focus on stabilizing his leg injury while monitoring his neurological status for any signs of deterioration. As she worked, Maria became aware of voices echoing from the valley below, confirming that hostile forces had detected their presence and were beginning to search the area. Lieutenant Commander's voice came through her radio earpiece, informing her that the team had spotted at least a dozen armed individuals moving up the mountain toward their location. The tactical situation was rapidly deteriorating, but injuries were too severe to simply move him without proper stabilization. Maria found herself in an impossible position, needing time to properly treat her patient while knowing that every minute they remained in the exposed position increased the danger to the entire team. The weight of 8 lives rested on her medical decisions, and she knew there would be no opportunity for mistakes. Chief appeared beside her, having rappelled down from the ridge to assess the situation firsthand. His experienced eyes took in condition and the tactical constraints they faced, understanding immediately why Maria needed additional time to stabilize her patient before any movement could be attempted. "How long do you need?" asked, his voice calm despite the urgency of their situation. Maria appreciated that he didn't question her medical judgment or push her to move faster than was safe for the patient. 10 more minutes to get him stable enough for transport," Maria replied while continuing to work on Sleg. "The fracture needs better immobilization, and I need to make sure there's no internal bleeding before we try to move him." Nodded and spoke into his radio, coordinating with to establish a defensive perimeter that could buy them the time Maria needed. The sound of voices from below was getting closer, and it was clear that contact with hostile forces was imminent. The team was about to face their first firefight with one man down and their corpsman exposed in a vulnerable position. As Maria continued treating his injuries, she could hear the other team members moving into defensive positions above them. The familiar sounds of weapons being checked and ammunition being distributed created a tense backdrop to her medical work. She knew that within minutes, the mountain ridge would become a battlefield, and her ability to save life would be tested under the most extreme conditions possible. Voices from below were now close enough that individual words could be distinguished, confirming that at least 12 armed individuals were searching the area where the rockslide had originated. Maria worked faster, knowing that the team's survival might depend on her ability to get ready for movement before the enemy forces located their position. Every decision she made in the next few minutes would determine whether her teammate lived or died, and whether the entire mission could be completed successfully. The first shots echoed across the mountain ridge just as Maria finished stabilizing's leg fracture. The hostile forces had located the team's position and opened fire from multiple directions, forcing the SEAL team members to take cover behind the rocky outcroppings while returning fire. Maria found herself trapped in the exposed position beside, with bullets striking the rocks around them and sending fragments of stone flying through the air. Chief immediately recognized the danger Maria and faced in their vulnerable location. Without hesitation, he began coordinating a suppressive fire mission to provide cover while Maria prepared for emergency evacuation. The sound of automatic weapons fire filled the mountain air as the team fought to maintain their defensive positions against a numerically superior enemy force. Maria's training kicked in as she worked under fire for the first time in her career. Despite the chaos around her, she methodically prepared for transport while monitoring his vital signs and neurological responses. His blood pressure was stabilizing thanks to the intravenous fluids she had administered, but his continued unconsciousness remained a serious concern that would require careful monitoring during any movement. The tactical situation grew more desperate as additional enemy forces appeared on adjacent ridges, effectively surrounding the SEAL team's position. Lieutenant Commander quickly realized that their original extraction plan was no longer viable, and he began coordinating with headquarters for emergency helicopter support while simultaneously directing the team's defensive fire. As the firefight intensified, Petty Officer Second Class, the team's demolitions expert, took a rifle round through his right shoulder that sent him stumbling backward into a rocky crevice. The impact spun him around and dropped him to the ground, where he lay clutching his wounded shoulder while trying to maintain his grip on his weapon with his uninjured arm. Maria heard's cry of pain over the sound of gunfire and immediately recognized that she now had 2 casualties requiring medical attention in an active combat zone. The decision of who to treat first in such circumstances had been covered extensively during her training, but the reality of making that choice under fire proved far more challenging than any classroom exercise had prepared her for. Working with remarkable efficiency despite the hostile fire, Maria quickly assessed wound while maintaining her monitoring of his condition. The bullet had passed through shoulder without hitting any major blood vessels or vital structures, but the pain was severe enough to significantly impact his combat effectiveness. She made the rapid decision that head injury took priority, but that wound could be quickly stabilized to keep him in the fight. Using techniques she had practiced countless times but never performed under combat conditions, Maria applied a pressure dressing to his shoulder wound, while simultaneously checking his pupil responses for signs of increased intracranial pressure. Her hands moved with practiced precision, despite the adrenaline coursing through her system and the constant threat of enemy fire. Chief watched in amazement as Maria managed both casualties while remaining calm and focused under the most extreme stress imaginable. Her ability to prioritize medical care based on tactical necessity rather than emotional reaction demonstrated a level of professional competence that exceeded what most combat veterans achieved after years of experience. The enemy forces continued to close in on the team's position, forcing Lieutenant Commander to make the difficult decision to call for immediate air support despite the risk of revealing their exact location to hostile intelligence networks. The team's survival now depended on coordinated close air support and emergency medical evacuation, both of which would require precise timing and communication under fire. As Maria continued treating both casualties, she noticed that neurological responses were beginning to improve slightly, suggesting that his head injury might be less severe than initially feared. However, his leg wound continued to bleed despite her efforts to control it, indicating possible damage to blood vessels that would require surgical intervention beyond what she could provide in the field. Meanwhile, was demonstrating remarkable resilience by attempting to return to combat despite his shoulder wound. Maria quickly realized that his determination to continue fighting could actually worsen his injury if not properly managed. She made the decision to inject him with a carefully calculated dose of pain medication that would allow him to function while preventing him from causing additional damage to his wounded shoulder. The sound of approaching helicopters suddenly filled the air, bringing hope that extraction might be possible despite the tactical situation. However, the enemy forces had also heard the aircraft and increased their rate of fire, determined to prevent the American team from escaping their carefully laid trap. Lieutenant Commander coordinated with the incoming aircraft, while Chief organized the team's movement toward a suitable landing zone approximately 200 meters from their current position. The movement would require carrying both and across open ground while under direct fire from multiple enemy positions. Maria made rapid preparations for moving both casualties, understanding that this would likely be their only opportunity for successful extraction. She stabilized leg splint for transport and ensured that shoulder wound was secured enough to prevent further bleeding during movement. Every decision had to be made quickly but correctly, as mistakes at this point could prove fatal for any of them. The team began their fighting withdrawal toward the extraction point with Maria coordinating the movement of both casualties, while the other team members provided covering fire. The distance seemed impossible to cross under such intense enemy fire, but the alternative was certain death or capture for all of them. During the movement, something unexpected happened that would change the team's perception of Maria forever. As they reached the halfway point to the landing zone, Chief was struck by enemy fire that sent him tumbling to the ground with what appeared to be a serious abdominal wound. The team's senior enlisted member and most experienced combat veteran was now down, creating a leadership crisis at the worst possible moment. Without hesitation, Maria left and in covered positions and moved directly towards location despite the intense enemy fire directed at her position. Her decision to expose herself to additional danger in order to treat a third casualty demonstrated a level of courage and commitment that exceeded anything her teammates had expected from their quiet, young corpsman. Was conscious but in severe pain from what appeared to be a penetrating abdominal wound that could prove fatal without immediate surgical intervention. Maria quickly assessed his condition while bullets continued to strike the rocks around them, understanding that she now had 3 serious casualties requiring simultaneous medical management in an active firefight. Working with speed and precision that amazed the other team members, Maria established a second intravenous line while applying direct pressure to his abdominal wound. Her ability to manage multiple critical patients under fire demonstrated medical skills that went far beyond what anyone had expected from someone so young and inexperienced in combat operations. The extraction helicopters were now overhead and beginning their approach to the landing zone, but the pilot reported that enemy fire was too intense for a safe landing. The aircraft would need suppressive fire from the ground team to create a brief window for extraction, but most of the team's effective shooters were now casualties requiring medical care. In that moment of crisis, Maria made a decision that would define her career and earn the permanent respect of every SEAL she would ever serve with. She quickly administered emergency medications to all 3 casualties to stabilize them for the final movement, then picked up Chief's weapon and began providing covering fire while simultaneously directing the other team members in moving the wounded toward the helicopter. Her accuracy with the rifle surprised everyone, including herself, as she engaged multiple enemy positions while calling out medical instructions for caring for the casualties during transport. The combination of medical expertise and combat effectiveness that she displayed in those crucial minutes exceeded anything her teammates had thought possible. The helicopters successfully landed despite continued enemy fire, and the team loaded their casualties aboard while Maria provided medical care during the flight to the nearest surgical facility. And all survived their injuries and made full recoveries thanks to her expert medical intervention under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. In the months that followed, word of Maria's performance during that mission spread throughout the special operations community. Her ability to manage multiple critical casualties while maintaining combat effectiveness under fire had demonstrated qualities that even veteran medics rarely displayed. The doubts about her capabilities that had existed before the mission were permanently erased by her actions on that mountain ridge. Chief, after his recovery, became one of Maria's strongest advocates within the SEAL community. His respect for her abilities was based not on sympathy or political correctness, but on the undeniable fact that she had saved his life and the lives of his teammates through pure medical skill and personal courage under fire. Lieutenant Commander later wrote in his mission report that Maria Santos had performed with a level of professionalism and competence that exceeded most combat veterans with years of experience. Her actions during the firefight had not only saved 3 lives, but had also enabled the successful completion of their mission despite overwhelming tactical disadvantages. The mission itself was ultimately successful, with both high-value targets captured during a follow-up operation that was made possible by the intelligence gathered during the original surveillance. Maria's medical intervention had prevented the loss of experienced team members whose skills would be crucial for future operations against terrorist networks in the region. For Maria, the mission represented a transformation from an untested newcomer to a fully accepted member of one of the military's most elite units. The quiet confidence she had always possessed was now backed by proven performance under the ultimate test of combat operations. Her teammates no longer saw her as a liability or an experiment, but as an essential member of their team whose medical skills could mean the difference between life and death. The experience also reinforced Maria's belief in her own abilities and her commitment to serving alongside America's most elite warriors. She had proven to herself and others that gender was irrelevant when it came to performing under pressure and saving lives in combat. Her dedication to excellence in military medicine had been tested under fire and found to be unshakable. Years later, Maria would go on to serve with distinction in numerous special operations missions around the world. Her reputation as one of the finest combat medics in the Navy grew with each successful mission, and she became a role model for other women seeking to break barriers in special operations medicine. The mission in Afghanistan had been her proving ground, but it was only the beginning of a distinguished career dedicated to saving the lives of America's most elite warriors.